Good afternoon, gentlemen. Wednesday, April 29th. We're doing a MMA Junkie YouTube live chat, and I figured what better guys to do it with than the boys from MMA Junkie Radio, Gorgeous George and Goze, except it's like the opposite way around. For years, you guys were hosting the show, and I had to be the talent and answer your questions. Now it's the other way around. You're answering my questions. What's going on, fellas?
What's up, man? It's good to know your faces.
Living that quarantine life. I can hear my son talking in the background. There's a better than zero chance that he's going to jump in here at some point, but I've just kind of come to accept it. I've come to live with it that, you know what, man? See, there he goes running across the background. This is just life. It's not, you can't worry about, is it unprofessional or, oh my gosh, how does this look? This is the life that we're all living right now. So let's just be honest about it. So if a dog happens to jump in your shot, don't even sweat it.
Dude, we're about 1 week away from you guys wishing I would wear pants. I'm still wearing them, just so you know. But I'm very close to just being underwear and nightshirt guy.
Well, I can't say that I can agree with you there. I am not wearing pants right now, but hey, the world doesn't need to know that. But you know what I am wearing? I put the game day blue on today. You know why? Because fighting. That's it, man. Fighting is just about back. Can you believe next week will be fight week again, man? I thought, to be honest with you, I thought it would never be fight week again. From all those years of complaining that everybody said we got too many fights, man, guys, is it just me, or are you starting to feel good? I mean, is it starting to feel real that like next week is actually fight week? We're gonna get back to normal business.
I think so. I think a couple weeks ago, I think a lot of us were pessimists, and we just kept thinking, but we still have this hurdle, we still have that, we still have this. Right now, it really feels good. It feels like everybody's on the same page. Promoters, media, fans, government. I really think this is going to happen, and it's kind of put a kick in my step. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I would agree. A lot of states are starting to turn back on in different phases or whatever. Florida's definitely leading the charge, but I'm not seeing that resistance that I was seeing a couple weeks ago. So I'm pretty excited about it, and I would now be shocked if it didn't happen. It's all systems go on my end.
Yeah, the government involvement, the quotes from the mayor, the quotes from the governor, that's what makes you feel a lot better about it. Should say, by the way, we got some topics we're going to talk about, but if anybody has any questions they want to bring up, we'll try to address it. Just throw it right there in the YouTube comments, and we'll do our best to address them. I mean, look, the guy Panic Demic right here, he's getting things started off with saying Tito was king, and then Fart Island. I don't know so much about the Fart Island. But Fight Island, I'm looking for. I will say Fight Island is wild. You know what? I mean, I am as excited I am to get back to fights. I will say this concept of Fight Island is still bizarre to me, man. It is, Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon in real life. And you know what's crazy is, guys, I know for a fact, I mean, you guys are doing as many interviews as I am and talking to as many people as you can and staying busy just the way I have. I have not been able to get any details from anybody on or off record. I mean, do you guys have any information on this thing at all that maybe you could share? Because I'm going to be 100% honest. I can't get a peep out of anybody. Even we get the little rumors in the back. Like, hey man, don't say nothing, man. But here's what I know. I haven't even been able to get any of that. You guys get anything?
I haven't gotten anything with substance, but I was telling Goze on our Sportscaster broadcast that we had a little while ago. For when this first came up with Fight Island, I was thinking the Bahamas. That it's a series of islands, and a few of them got hit, and maybe this would be a good way to help bring back one of those islands and use maybe some of the infrastructure that's left from that island. And it's close to the state of Florida, where so many MMA fighters are housed. It's also a jaunt, I guess, for eventually when the Europeans head over this way, and even a lot of the South Americans, which most of them are on the Atlantic side, Brazil mainly. But then I started thinking, wait a minute, Dana White said there's going to be some UFC PIs. One of them is going to be in Puerto Rico, a couple in Mexico, but Puerto Rico, they also got hit. Again, an opportunity for the UFC to maybe do something there, but also take over a country that has infrastructure and has hospitals and hotels and everything he's talked about. Then get ready for this one, John. Do you remember when Dana White hopped on a plane and he had made a promise or an agreement or a deal with Mike Swick? He goes, I'm going to go check out your gym. And then when he was there, he said he was blown away. You could tell he was being genuine. AKA Thailand is really, really beautiful. And it's located on, I guess, I'm not exactly sure if Phuket winds up being an island or where, but, Thailand is basically a coastal country. And you could just tell Swick's put some money into it, but it looks beautiful. And it looks like the type of place where a fighter could go and house themselves for 2 months and really, really isolate themselves, get some work done. And Swick has also thrown some fights. I'm not sure if it was on sand, but I know it had that whole beach feel. And I know Dana White, he doesn't just get blown away by anything, but he went out of his way to make a video and really, really pump things up for AKA Thailand, for Mike Swick. So I started thinking, maybe that's what he has in mind. I don't think it's going to be in Thailand. I'm not saying anything about Southeast Asia or anywhere in the Pacific, but I'm just thinking something like Quick's Gym on Puerto Rico.
Interesting. So here's a question I'll pose to you guys, and it comes from a reader here, Randy Chason, I believe is how you would say his last name. Does Fight Island make this sport look like a bush league? NBA doesn't have Hoop Island or Dunk Island. That's kind of an interesting question because for the most part, everybody that I've heard, when they hear this concept, especially fighters, they seem all about it, man. They seem like, dude, I want to go there. Let's figure this thing out. I think it's going to be amazing. I mean, heck, you guys talked to Valentina Shevchenko, a reigning UFC champion who said, man, I'm in. This sounds like an amazing plan. But Randy has an interesting question there. Does it seem bush league to you? So for all the excitement we've heard from fighters, do you guys have any concerns that maybe it doesn't look as top-notch as it should? Goze, what do you think?
Yeah, man, that was one of the first things that bugged me about this whole situation was I want to get back to fights as soon as we can, but I want the fighters to be safe. I want the organization to be safe because we spent so long trying to legitimize this sport, taking those steps, finally getting on Fox, finally getting on ESPN, little by little getting the credibility of some of these bigger TV networks, these bigger shows, to just kind of throw it away the way it seemed like we were doing early on. That did bother me. I'm glad that the UFC now has released information a little bit more, and I think that kind of helps because it doesn't make everything look so shady. They tell you that they're going to have hotels there. They're going to be, this is how they're going to do their testing. So I can see where that chatter has somewhat of a point. It could seem like that maybe to the other sports organizations because the UFC is just not following suit with what they're doing. But isn't that kind of how this sport was born? There a little bit of a rebel side. So I think at the end of the day, when they get that first card through, I think we'll realize that a lot more safety precautions have been taken. And I think we'll be okay. But I can understand why somebody would see that right now.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and I do think it's important to address. I mean, and I look forward to talking to UFC staff and really getting the details. I don't know that a lot of things have been made about like Dana White's comments about "Don't worry, we got this." I don't know that he's necessarily the right guy to talk to about this. I mean, no disrespect to Dana, but he's got a ton going on. The safety stuff and all that. There's other people that are tasked with handling all that, and those are the people that I'm looking forward to talking to. Getting down there and talking to Dr. Davidson. Talking to Jeff Nowitzki. Talking to the crew there about how things are actually being handled, and I think they'll be a little bit more specific about what's going on. And as for the Fight Island, I don't think it's going to make it look bush league. I think the visuals of it are going to be absolutely incredible, man. I think the UFC, they always do a great job with production, and if it really is an octagon on the beach, like I believe you mentioned to Brett Okamoto, man, that'll be something crazy to look at. So that's off in the future, though. We know we've got UFC 249 next week, first of 3 cards. Guys, I want to ask you about the main event. I mean, obviously, we didn't get the fight we wanted. Crazy. I mean, we could lament that again for the 5th time. Tony Ferguson is not going to be fighting Khabib Nurmagomedov, but he is fighting Justin Gaethje, and I feel like most people have been pretty excited about the matchup. If we're not going to get the fight we wanted, at least we're getting one hell of a fight. But I'm kind of curious for you guys, kind of who has the more difficult preparation here. On the one hand, you had Tony Ferguson, who has been preparing for a long time, had to go through the disappointment of losing the fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov. Then the dates are getting changed around. Obviously, he's going through a lot of changes, and certainly a different stylistic opponent. Meanwhile, Justin Gaethje, of course, he's coming off the bench, even though he normally says that, he doesn't like to take short notice fights. He's doing that now. So more so really than just the matchup itself in terms of stylistic exchanges. I want to know what you guys think. Who's got the tougher assignment in terms of just the preparation and facing the bigger challenges? George, what do you think? Who's got the tougher hill here to climb?
I think things evened out once Tony actually went and did that weight cut that he didn't really need to do, but he went and he did it. It's a little taxing on the body. Everybody will tell you there's 2 fights. There's making weight and then the fight itself. Of course, I know Tony's programmed in another way that most lightweights or most people on planet Earth aren't, when it comes to competitiveness and all that. So I just think that Justin didn't have as much time to get ready for what was going to possibly happen at Tachi Palace back in April. But now there's been more time added. He's gotten an additional 3 weeks. And, Tony probably peaked physically and mentally, went through the weight cut, and then now he's got to do that again. So maybe by then, I think Justin Gaethje made up a little bit of ground. They're both wrestlers, so they're both very, very strong-minded. They're both veterans. They both have worn a decorated belt from a top organization. So I don't think there's not much to this, man. We got a guy with 2 losses versus a guy with 3 losses, both 20-some wins, each in their career. It is as close of a fight as you can get. Both guys are studs, man. I'm leaning towards Tony Ferguson slightly, but it's as even of a matchup as you can get.
It's funny because I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but when you talk to the odds makers or, that's not how the public is necessarily looking at it right now. Tony Ferguson, I think, opened around a 2-1 favorite, -200. I see it's been bet down a little bit, about a -180 as we jumped on here earlier. Some of the books I'm looking at. No, you guys like to lay a wager or two. I mean, Goze, let me ask you, what do you think? I mean, is that a little heavy on Tony Ferguson as the favorite here, or is that understandable given his pedigree, given the fact that Gaethje's stepping in on short notice? What do you think's influencing that to be? Because I agree with what George is saying that, man, this seems like a razor-thin fight. Not that a 2-1 line is, way out there, but it is maybe a little stronger than I expected to see.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit too much, guys. Really, when you think about it, from my opinion, I think it's tougher on Tony Ferguson because here we are. We're a little bit over a month on a quarantine, and we're losing our minds, right? We haven't left our houses. We've been one-track mind this whole time. This is a dude that's been so close to one fight so many times, and he's had that taken away from him. He's been preparing for a completely different style for so long, and he never got that conclusion. So to have to flip the script, prepare for a completely different guy, I think that's very taxing on a human being not to have that release, not to have that completion. As we're just engaged, he just kind of popped in, and this was his homework assignment, and he got right to it. Tony, I think psychologically, it's probably a lot of highs and lows that he's had to go through, and we all know that can be taxing on your body as well, just being in this long training camp. I think it's a difficult situation for him. So even if both of these guys had equal amount of time to prepare for themselves, I still wouldn't have it this high. But on top of that, the fact that Tony's had to endure just one of the longest camps ever, I think it should be a lot closer.
It's funny. Tony's taken a lot of criticism, obviously, for making weight. A lot of people said that, why did he put his body through that? Maybe that's going to be an issue. You mentioned the psychological factors. I wonder how much of that was like him being able to move that next chapter. It was kind of a mental thing. Yeah, interesting. All right, taking a look at the comments real quick. First of all, not really a question, but a shout out from the man Westside. Just throws up Junkie Nation with a bunch of exclamation points. I like that. This is feeling like old school. Feeling like old school MMA Junkie radio. Respect to Junkie Nation. Thank you, Westside. But we'll stick there because there is a question there. Maria Gronin, I guess, is what we'll go there. Hopefully I didn't butcher that one. If Tony loses, will Tony versus Khabib never happen then? What do you think, guys? Is the future of Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov hanging in the balance of this matchup? We'll start with you, George. Is this thing, if it doesn't happen, if Tony loses this fight, has the pandemic ruined this matchup forever?
I swore about a week ago he turned more towards positivity when it had to pandemic. Excuse me. But what scares me the most is Nurmagomedov. If he beats the win fight, meaning the Gaethje Ferguson fight, I think there's like another super fight out there, maybe either Conor Part 2 or GSP, we'll say. So there's maybe 2 or 3 fights, and he could sail off into the sunset. That's the scary part about why it may not happen. But what I've learned in this sport, it seems like everyone takes a loss at some point. So even if they both did, I still could see us wanting to get that fight, even if it's years later. The same way we're saying, boy, it'd be nice to see Conor and Nate, even though they're both working off losses. The first 2 just delivered. Now, in this case, nothing's delivered, but that's why we want to see it. So going back to my positivity, I'm going to say yes, at one point or another, we will see this fight. And that doesn't mean I'm counting Gaethje out. I'm just saying there will be a scenario where these 2 will tie it up.
Goze, let's build off that a little bit. If Gaethje were to win this fight, which obviously he has certainly the ability to do so, Ali Abdelaziz has already said, he has no problem, putting Gaethje together with Khabib Nurmagomedov. Obviously, he doesn't want to stand in the way of either one of their dreams. But let me ask you, I think we had gotten to the point where everybody said, look, this fight is so big, Conor doesn't get to jump in, even if it's a money fight. There are no other options on the table. If Justin Gaethje wins this fight, I guess the interim title helps you make sure that there's a unification right away, but we've seen the UFC make some weird decisions. If Justin Gaethje wins this fight, is Gaethje versus Khabib a given next, or are there other possibilities, like Conor stepping in and having this big money fight that would probably be the biggest in the sport right now? Dana has even said that. What do you think? Is it automatic that the unification would be next, or would there be other possibilities?
I think it's automatic. I think the only way you can avoid it is if there is a victory but also an injury that accompanies that. And if you look at the way Justin Gaethje fights, and you look at the way Tony Ferguson fights, that is a very high possibility that you're not going to make it out of a fight like that 100%. And Khabib's timeline, he only has so much to fight every year, so much time. So I think that could be maybe the spin where you would say, well, since this guy's not ready to go, why don't we do this Conor McGregor fight? However, I personally don't think that that's the type of fight that Conor McGregor would want. Conor McGregor is pushed by his fans, by the big arenas, the big crowds. I don't know that a guy like that would be able to get up for this type of fight, with nobody around, just him and his opponent. It's not Conor-esque. And Conor's one of the guys that has the amount of money where he can just sit back and wait for all this to play out. So it just depends, is he at home driving himself crazy? He wants to get into the cage, maybe a little bit. I think they all are. But to this type of environment, to be fighting on an island or maybe the Apex Center without the walkout music, everything that accompanies a big UFC weekend, that's not Conor McGregor's style. So I don't think it will happen.
Man, you make such a great point there, and it's one that I think you have to consider when you're discussing the different scenarios. And it seems weird, but the idea, because listen, we know we're having these next 3 events in Florida. We know Fight Island's on the table. I think we all agree that the long-term plan, or at least the interim plan right now, is to do shows at the UFC Apex. Dana's alluded to that as well, and it just makes all the sense in the world. It's right here in Las Vegas where we all live. The production facility, they've got the means. There's hotel access will be easy. It just makes a lot of sense. But yeah, crowds, I don't think are going to be at sporting events of any kind for quite some time. I would imagine, when fall rolls around, the NFL, that might be kind of a test, because obviously they've got so much power and money and influence, and maybe they start to see some change in legislation. But at least until the NFL season, and I think beyond that, I don't think we'll see any crowds. So seeing Conor fight in an empty environment, I don't know. George.
John, I did want to chime in on something. When you brought up Fight Island again, it triggered that question that we got earlier about, Hoops Island. And the NBA is all based basically in the United States, with the exception of Toronto. We have a great relationship with Canada. I'm sure that's something that could be worked out. But Fight Island's also a deal where I think in the future it's going to be either used as a PI or just the location for fighters to go and train. I think the UFC is doing that with, they've done it already with China. But don't forget, this pandemic we're going through could go in waves. We also live in a city where we have a lot of people that come from all over the world to this entertainment capital here, on the west side of the United States, that very easily could shut down in another way. So I think the UFC had a vision, not necessarily to sidestep, I guess, legislation, but I think they also knew that if this happens again, and because it affected the whole planet, I think they wanted to create a spot where they could have their international fighters come in. A lot of it has to do with paperwork, visas, and things like that. So, I don't know that it was a fair comparison on his part for, Hoops Island. And I'm not sure if he was trying to throw shade, but I think there was more to it. So sorry to go back 10 minutes in the history of this chat. It just hit me.
No, I think it's a fair point. I think the UFC, realized very early the value of the Apex, man. Whether they meant for it to have that type of value or not, it became an extremely, valuable piece of property for them. And they thought, well, if we can secure something internationally as well, man, that puts us in a great scenario. Because I think you're right. This is kind of an eye-opening situation for all of us, right? Like, even if we get this COVID-19 thing under control, man, what if something sweeps the globe like this again? It doesn't seem out of the question. So it's not bad to have a backup plan in place. All right, we'll go back to the comments here just briefly. Not a question, but a comment from Lizard King talking about this main event here. And he said, Ferguson has all styles. He doesn't have a style. He will be ready for whatever. So Lizard King is believing Tony Ferguson as well. One more from West Side as well. Tony will get dropped a few times, but he's going to come back and win by 4th round submission. So a lot of love for Tony Ferguson there. We did have one question here from Maria Gronin. Will MMA Junkie do a live weigh-in stream for UFC 249? I hope so. I can tell you that's the working plan right now. We don't have all the details of how things are going to work down in Florida, but that's the plan right now. So stay tuned. We'll share as much information as we can as we get closer. Guys, let's talk about the co-main event a little bit as well. Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. And by the way, was it Justin Gaethje who posted yesterday about how many Arizona ties are in the top of this main event, co-main event for UFC 249? It's pretty amazing that how many of them were brought up in the Arizona area. But of course, this fight was originally supposed to be Jose Aldo. The travel implications that you talked about are reasons that couldn't happen. Dominic Cruz steps in. A little bit controversial, I imagine. It's been several years since he fought, and of course, he's coming off a loss. I did talk to Marlon Moraes the other day, and I thought, man, what a class act that guy always has been. But he says, of course, Dominic deserves this opportunity. You know, he's a legend of the sport. And, yes, coming off a loss, and he's probably one of the best ever at 135. Let the guy step in. And then he also kind of went through and named some other things. And, oh, by the way, Aljamain Sterling isn't even ready anyway. You know, he's injured and he doesn't want to fight during the pandemic. Peter Yan can't get a visa either, so he's not in there. So, I mean, it just made sense. But Dominic stepping in. But I want to ask you guys, again, similar to what we talked about in the main event, who's got the tougher assignment here? I mean, Dominic Cruz famously is a guy that says he doesn't believe in ring rust, and he's shown it over the course of his career that he can have phenomenal performances off long layoffs. But this is Henry Cejudo. Or is it Henry Cejudo that's had to go from Aldo, had to go now to Dominic Cruz, is obviously doesn't have a lot of fresh tape to prepare for and that sort of thing. Goze, who's got the bigger challenge here in preparing for this matchup?
It's right there, but I know you guys aren't going to let me get away with that. So what I'm going to say is I believe that Dominic Cruz probably has the tougher time preparing for Henry Cejudo for this one reason, and it's that Henry Cejudo has proven that he's still getting better. He's still picking things up. He's still adding things to his game. So a Henry Cejudo from fight to fight looks a little bit different. There's always a little different wrinkle that he adds there. Dominic Cruz on his side, I mean, how many times have we heard from other fighters what a nightmare it is to prepare for him? When you bring somebody in to mimic him, there aren't very many people that can move that way and fight at the same time. So it's very difficult, but Henry has proven, especially with the coaches that he has around him, the training partners, he always seems to be ready for these situations. And, you add in ring rust, even though Dominic doesn't believe in it, and he's kind of shown that it probably doesn't affect him. That was also a younger Dominic Cruz, and this is an older Dominic Cruz, and we can't be father time, right?
Yeah, man, that's a great point. George, what do you think about that? I mean, as he alluded to there, I mean, Dominic Cruz has taken these lengthy time offs before and come back with stellar performances. Dillashaw, Mizugaki, I mean, just had phenomenal performances. But, I mean, Cejudo, probably a little bit of a different animal, right? I mean, certainly different stylistically. And, the mindset, obviously, I don't know if you guys know this, he actually won an Olympic gold medal at one point. So that's kind of a big test of your mental and physical skills. I know, a little known fact, rarely gets shared. I wanted to kind of drop that little nugget in there. But what do you guys think? I mean, is this more of a challenge for Dominic Cruz than some of these other layoffs and some of these other returns? I mean, is this a tougher task, or should we assume, hey man, we've seen this guy, just blow the doors off after taking lengthy times away. He's going to do it here. What are you expecting out of Dominic Cruz?
Dominic Cruz is one of the all-time greats. You can't take that away from him. WEC champion, UFC champion. He's got title defenses. He's a master of the game mentally. So he'll be good up here. The body just hasn't held up. He's had some unfortunate injuries along the way. That said, when he came back against Takeya Mizugaki, there was about a 3.5, 4-year layoff, similar to this one. He wiped the mat off with him. But there's a difference between Takeya Mizugaki and Henry Cejudo. Not just because Cejudo's a champ, but Cejudo's just at a peak right now. You know what I mean? Mizugaki was a guy that was a respected bantamweight who got some wins and he got some losses, but he was never a champ. I mean, when you become a champ, not just in this sport, but like John told us earlier, which I was not aware of that, but he was also a gold medalist in wrestling, apparently. I mean, think about how much of you're on this level. He can match Dominic on that level. And if anything, he's pushing Dominic around. It's a huge difference. I'm going with Cejudo on this one. If Dominic pulls it off, I wouldn't be shocked because, again, he's one of the GOAT. Right now he's the GOAT of the bantamweight division, and he's one of the greatest to ever do it. But man, just Cejudo's clicking. I'm tired of going against him. I keep losing money.
Goze, let me ask you a question. Is Dominic Cruz a UFC Hall of Famer right now? And if not, if he wins this fight, does that secure it for him? I mean, let's say it's just this fight and that's it. Is he already won, or would this win secure for him? What do you think? Is he a UFC Hall of Famer?
I think he already is. Dominic Cruz comes from the WEC. If you look at the WEC and their history and even their influence on the UFC, the fighters that came from there and what that organization did to strengthen the UFC, the WEC was no joke. And that guy was a dominant fighter. He's been able to do it. He came around at a time where you could almost say he's gone through a couple generations of styles of fighters, back in that day where there just weren't that many training partners to now these super gyms. He's survived it all. He's done it up. He's done it all. Add in the commentary, all that stuff. I think for sure he's a Hall of Famer. And if he can even rack up this win, I think now you start throwing him back up into that GOAT talk.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's actually when I was talking to Marlon Moraes the other day, I said, he's a future UFC Hall of Famer. And I actually caught myself as I said that. I'd never really considered it before. I do think he is. I think he's a UFC Hall of Famer right now, regardless if he wins this fight or not. I mean, you look at all those accomplishments, but it did just give me pause. I thought, well, wait a minute. I'm saying that, but is he? Because his UFC career has obviously been so cut short and all this, the starts and stops. But I think when you look at the whole body of work, especially when you consider that, look, that body of work was under the Zuffa banner as well. So I think that kind of adds into a scenario. George, what do you think? Is he a definite Hall of Famer at this point?
I would agree. What he did in WEC was, pretty amazing, just that alone, because the UFC didn't have that weight class. So the WEC arguably housed the best lighter weight class fighters. And Dominic Cruz not only went in there and won a title, he defended it. Then he proved it when he came over to the UFC, and I think he's had like 5 or 6 fights, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, it hasn't been much in the time that he's been there because of these injuries, but he's definitely held his own. The title that he held on to for a while, they finally had to take it from him, whether it was stripped or relinquished. I don't exactly remember how it went down, but he came back and won it against a quality bantamweight. So, yeah, he's definitely done enough in his career. It kind of reminds me of, I guess, how my dad used to talk about Gale Sayers back in the day. He didn't have the 16 or 18,000 yards that Emmett Smith did or those other guys that came, But what he was able to package in the 6-8 years he was there was so great that he was worthy of being, talked about being one of the greatest running backs ever.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, you go ahead, Gus.
Well, I was going to say, one of my personal barometers for greatness, guys, when you're trying to figure out how great an individual is or a fighter, there's certain fighters that you can take and look at them and say, oh, yeah, if you've never seen this guy fight, he'll remind you he's like this guy, only this, right? With Dominic Cruz, you can't say he's like anyone. His fighting style is very unique to him. The things that he's done is very unique to him. When you can't compare an individual to other great individuals, that kind of shows you just the level of greatness this guy has.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, let's jump into the chat again real quick. I'll start out with a question here from Grant Rice. It says, with the UFC ramping up the schedule this May, how many by years in do you believe we will see? And guys, I'll just take that off the top. I mean, the UFC president Dana White and everybody else associated with the company said, listen, we're contracted to do 42 events this year. We're going to do 42 events this year. And I don't see any reason that won't come to fruition. I mean, we mentioned the UFC Apex. I think we're going to see a lot of shows here in our backyard in Las Vegas. I've kind of joked about it a little bit. I mean, technically, the UFC could do 42 event cards in 42 days if they wanted. I mean, they could get all the way to mid-November and still pull this thing off if they wanted to do it. So, regardless of what kind of delays we get, right now, I think we're going to see a full 42, no problem, because, they can just rattle off shows once they get approved. The biggest thing, of course, will just be getting approval to host the events here in Nevada. Right now, we have a stay-at-home order that lasts through April 30th, which is tomorrow. But we haven't had any real plans of what the release is or how we're going to move forward. So it's my understanding that we may end up with a little bit more of a stay-at-home order. If that's the case, it'll probably be a little bit longer before the Nevada State Athletic Commission can say you can host events. But you can bet at some point this year the schedule will shift to the Apex, and I think you'll see, like we're seeing coming up, a Saturday event, a Wednesday event, a Friday event, a Sunday event. You know what I mean? They'll be all over the map. So another comment here from West Side talking about that matchup that we were just talking about says, I believe Cruz has a good chance to beat Triple C if he comes back like he always does. He definitely has a great chance, man. Dominic Cruz is phenomenal. I think we just kind of extolled his greatness right there. Question right below from Jack Shalinor. Fellas, can we please have a breakdown of the main event? Who's going to win? Now, I will say we talked about the main event kind of extensively off the top, but I don't know if anybody really committed to a pick yet. I mean, we talked about kind of what could potentially happen, what some of the factors were, that sort of thing. I think, George, you said you were kind of leaning towards Ferguson. Guys, tell me, either one, does any of you have a pick that you're saying, man, I know exactly, I've seen this fight in my head, it's played out, this is how it's going to go down, what's the breakdown, what's going to win? Are any of you, dialed in? And by the way, I should say, he's got the hashtag Team El Kukui, so I think we know which way he's leaning there. Which way are you leaning? Anybody dialed in on this one?
Yeah, I can go first. When have you seen a fight where Tony, I mean, for as great as he is, he still takes a lot of shots. So the question is, can he stay away from Justin Gaethje early? Because we know the volume that Justin carries, the pace that he carries. If Justin can connect on one of these shots, it's going to feel a lot different than some of these other guys that have hit him in the past. So he has to be very careful. I know Tony likes to come out and be I don't want to say reckless, because I think there is a method to the madness, but he has to keep his hands up, because if Justin lands one of these big shots, it might be over. And Justin, on the flip side, he's got to tone down the aggression a little bit as well, because Tony's very good at recovery. And if you end up with Tony recovering and in a bad situation, this dude will make you pay. We saw it with Kevin Lee. He's very, very tough. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to lean towards Justin Gaethje, because I've seen this dude hit live, and it is no joke. So I'm going to lean Justin Gaethje, but just barely.
I like it. There's a comment here from Nicole and Jeremy. Tony wins by TKO. Can anyone imagine if Tony loses? I think Ferguson is getting kind of a raw deal. He's already interim and should be fighting for the real belt. And I want to comment on that, because I think it's a sentiment that a lot of people share, but I think it's a little bit flawed. I mean, in a perfect world, you're absolutely right. Tony Ferguson should not be fighting for an interim title. It sucks that he got stripped of it in the first place, to be honest with you. I mean, to lose a title that you never lost in the cage, I mean, I think that sucked. But we understand the UFC has to move on, and I get it. But, I mean, it would also be more of a raw deal if there wasn't an interim title on the line, right? I mean, you can't strip Khabib right now of the belt. I mean, Khabib jumped through hoops, man. I don't blame Khabib at all for what the situation that happened here. I mean, he went from California to Abu Dhabi to Russia and finally said, listen, man, I just can't, no more. We already knew Ramadan was coming up, so we already knew that he doesn't fight during that time. So, I mean, I would not feel good about stripping Khabib of the belt right now and to be like, hey, this is for the undisputed title. You can't do that. So on the one hand, I agree. It is a raw deal that, this is an interim title for Tony Ferguson, but it would be even more of a raw deal if a belt wasn't on the line. So I'm okay with it. George, how about you? I mean, you said, I think you were leaning towards Tony. I mean, I thought Goze gave an excellent breakdown. Did you hear any flaws in there or anything that you wanted to key in on that you thought nailed it?
Yeah, I would just add to Nicole, if you're all about Team Kukui, if Tony wins when he faces Khabib, he'll get a cut of the pay-per-view. So financially, it could be that he was thinking of that too. In taking this fight, now he fights Khabib and he'll make a way bigger payday. He's got some money to make up, because he just hasn't fought as frequently in the last few years. Time's running out too. I mean, he's mid-30s, and who knows how many more big fights he'll get. This is the big payday that he's basically lining up for. Now, look, Justin Gaethje has great kicks. I mean, kicks like an ox. He has power in his hands. He's got more of the one-stop power than Tony Ferguson has. And he likes to basically take control of the fight. But Tony's just on another pace, on another level when it comes to the pace that he fights you at. I've been told by people that fight him that it almost feels like you're fighting two people, because you may get hit with an elbow, you may get hit with a kick, you may get hit with a punch. He's just constantly coming at you. And on the ground, he's very, very tricky, whether he's on his back or whether he's on top. What he basically tries to do is get you to later in the fight where basically he feels like up here he'll dominate you, he'll break you. Justin Gaethje's not easy to break if he's breakable at all. Basically what happens is you basically hurt them to the point where you stop them via TKO, like Poirier and Alvarez have been able to do. And in both fights, Justin Gaethje was doing well in those fights. So the Ferguson fight is very winnable for Justin Gaethje. If you're a bettor, you almost want to lean more towards the underdog money if you just feel like it's a coin flip. But if you're on Team Ferguson, like Goze said, I think early on you just want to avoid the power, the explosion from Gaethje. Not make sure you don't put yourself in a position where you're taking too many of those leg kicks, because Justin stopped fights with leg kicks and then eventually start to take over like he has in other fights. If you put a gun to my head and said, we're pulling the trigger if you get it wrong, I'm going with Ferguson. He's just too well-rounded in every facet of the – I wish he had a little one-punch power, though I witnessed close against Ramsey Ninjam at the finale years ago. But later years, it seems like he's more – chops you down, like if you're a tree, eventually you fall.
By the way, I want to go to the Q&A real quick as well, or the chat, I should say. Maria Gronin has a question here. What happens if Tony versus Justin ends up in a draw? Maria, shut your mouth. What are you doing? Don't tempt the MMA gods, man. Have you seen what the MMA gods have done to us with this fight? Do not put any more energy in that whatsoever.
Hey, John, let me ask you something. That came up when Davison Figueiredo was fighting Joseph. I knew the UFC wanted to come away with a winner, but what was the deal with, had they drawn, is there a sixth round? Like, have they ever come up with that? I know that most states legal 25 minutes of combat, but have they ever thought of that in those situations where there's a vacant? Because the draw here is just, but when they want to walk away with a champion, have they ever come up with an option or anything like that?
Stop talking, George. What are you doing? We can't talk about it, man. No, you can't actually. The unified rules, I guess if you're doing your own event on Fight Island, you can do whatever the hell you want. But technically the unified rules are you can only fight for 25 minutes. So you wouldn't be able to do that. So you have a draw at that point. But stop talking about it. Everybody stop talking about a draw.
We're gonna have Ferguson versus Khabib, in my opinion. I mean, I think Ferguson just gets the advantage. He holds the advantage he had going in.
Oh, that's funny. By the way, Nicole and Jeremy chimed back in and said, I feel even if Tony loses, he should still get Khabib. Then Justin gets that winner. I mean, look, that would be a bizarre scenario, but it's not out of the question. I mean, right? Like, it would not be a tough sell to be like, look, this is the fight we all wanted to see. And then it didn't happen because of a global pandemic. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be hard to be like, hey, Tony was tested. He didn't really have a full training camp. He had all these things. I mean, let's be honest, it wouldn't be a hard sell. So, I don't think that's what will happen. It's not necessarily out of the realm of possibility, right? I mean, they could sell that.
Can you imagine? Oh my God. We did a simulated fights for a sportscaster video game. And we had that as our main event, Tony Ferguson and Khabib. And believe it or not, halfway through our broadcast, it froze. And for a second, we were nervous we were not going to be able to show you guys that fight. That's how cursed this thing can get.
That is crazy. It's cursed even in video game land. That's great. All right, let's talk about the other big one on this card. Francis Ngannou versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Obviously, this is a fight that people have been excited about since the moment it was first announced. I've said all along, props to Francis Ngannou for taking this, because I think it was really just kind of a stay busy fight. I mean, he's obviously got a lot more skins on the wall, and he's giving kind of the new kid, the opportunity to really shoot up the ranks in Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And then it's a dangerous fight, certainly for both men. But I wanted to say props to Francis for originally taking this, and then props to keeping it. You know what I mean? That he stuck with it even when it got rescheduled. On paper, it's fireworks. Here's what I find interesting, and I'll ask you, Goze. I mean, both these guys came out and said, look, this should be an interim title fight. I mean, and the reasoning made a lot of sense. I mean, we don't really know what's going on with Stipe and Cormier and the trilogy and all that right now. So, let's keep the division going. With both guys making that case, Goze, are you surprised at all that the UFC didn't decide to make this an interim title fight? Or do you feel like, maybe they were, asking for a little bit more than they deserved?
It's funny. When I first heard that, I thought, no, enough with the interim titles. I'm one of those guys that has a little bit more problem with that, because when Dana White talks about introducing a new weight class, the first thing he says is we don't want to be like boxing. And I feel like that's not the closest you come to being boxing. The closest you actually come to boxing is when you introduce this interim title so much, because what it does is it takes away a little bit of the value of the real belt. And that's what happens in boxing is guys get stuck with contracts where they're like, well, I can make more money to fight this guy, so I'll just relinquish this belt. So when I heard it, I was like, nah, not another belt. But honestly, the case they make is not that bad. And it's not that much different than really what we're doing with Khabib here, right? It's really not that much different. I mean, we kind of have an idea of what's next in the heavyweight division, but it seems like just something that we're allowed to talk about, but nobody else is. We never really see anything come out of it. So actually, in this situation, they make a pretty good point.
Yeah, I agree. I was a little bit surprised. It just seemed an easy sell. I mean, I kind of thought, and listen, they organized this card, I guess, before they were aware that they were going to have the other two cards, in a couple of days. It seemed like you could have had it as a main event on one of those other two cards. Not to take away from the main events that are in place, but I just feel like that's a heavily anticipated one. George, what do you think about that fight? I mean, A, you feel free to chime in on the lack of a belt being there if you think it's right or not, but B, just talk about the matchup. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, what's going to be happening in this fight. But do you see an edge one way or the other for these two heavy hitters?
Well, for sure, in Ngannou pole position, the challenge for the winner of Miocic and Cormier, which really is only one-sided because Cormier saying this is his last fight either way. So I think Ngannou with a win should be next. He is taking a chance, I guess, by risking that. But he's also fighting a guy, and I don't mean to disrespect Jairzinho, but I mean, Jairzinho was not looking that great against Alistair Overeem. He was showing a lot of deficiencies and weaknesses, and I'm not sure that Ngannou can necessarily exploit those, but he was on his way to losing that fight. I think Ngannou's got to feel pretty good about where he sits. I think Jairzinho's is where Ngannou was about 2 or 3 years ago. Really raw, a lot of power, a lot of athleticism, but as he honed it all in, how is he going to be in the later rounds, in title fights or whatever? I mean, I guess he got a little bit of a taste of that with Alistair, but a little bit of that could have just been Alistair losing focus. I don't know. But he's in a great position. If Jairzinho wins, I think he falls behind Curtis Blaydes. I think Curtis Blaydes is definitely interested in this fight because if Ngannou loses, Blaydes pretty much jumps up into that pole position there to challenge for that other fight. What I'd like to see, though, is Ngannou, if he wins, take a fight, if he can, on the same card as DC and Miocic. That way he's the backup, and he can fight somebody else. He hasn't – I think it's going to be almost a year since he's fought, and he gets paid well, and I know he'd like to make up some of that money. Or if he feels that's too risky, then just be ready to go for the winner of that fight. But the problem, guys, is Miocic and Cormier – those guys just don't fight often. I mean, let's backtrack the last 2-3 years. They're just fighting like once or twice a year. It's just not happening much. So I'd hate for Ngannou to win and have to sit a whole year before he can challenge for the title again.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's interesting. Like I said, I don't want to disrespect Jairzinho either. He certainly has the ability to win this fight here. But it is wild how much, a spectacular highlight in the course of 1 second really changes how you felt. Because, had that punch not landed at the end of the fight with Overeem and that fight just goes to a unanimous decision, man, you talk about some luster being taken off, his abilities as a prospect. It certainly would have changed things. I'll take one more here from the comment section. Nicole and Jeremy chimes in again with his prediction here and says, I think Rozenstruik wins KO. He's going to hurt Francis. Francis will get tired unless he's able to wrestle Rozenstruik. So going with Rozenstruik. Guys, real quickly, we got to wrap up, but I want to ask you, the rest of this card is definitely stacked. We'll start with you, Goze, but is that stands out to you? The main card wraps up with Cater Stevens, which is a phenomenal featherweight fight. Another couple bangers, heavyweight division with York Castro and Greg Hardy, and then you start getting down to just a ridiculous, if you even want to call it prelims. Cowboy versus Pettis, Alexei Olenek for Doom, Esparza Waters, and Uriah Hall, Jacare, Luke A. Price, the rematch of that crazy fight. Bryce Mitchell, Charles Rosa, that's going to be insane. It starts off with Sam Malvey and Ryan Spann. What a heck of a lineup for UFC 249. Goes. One of those matchups out to you above the rest is one you're looking forward to?
Cater Stevenson, I think, is going to be a barn burner. I really like Calvin Cater's style. I think he's getting better with every fight. That one's going to be a lot of fun, but honestly, just the undercard alone can be its own card. It's so good. But there's a matchup on there that I play out in my head over and over, and I come up with different results, and that's Carla Esparza and Michelle Waterson. I feel like is tactically is going to be really fun to watch. And to find out just, where they're going to be at the end of this fight, who's going to make that last push for greatness.
Yeah, no question about it. A lot of implications there. Like you said, stylistically, it's just fun, but then the implications for both their career, man, it's kind of a crossroads fight as well. George, we'll ask you the same question. One of these outside of the big three that most stands out to you or that you're most looking forward to?
Definitely Uriah Hall versus Jacare Souza. It's the traditional grappler versus striker, except both guys have done so much to shore up their game. Now, from Jacare's side, he's really picked up a formidable striking game, all right, to complement a world-class jiu-jitsu. From Uriah Hall, it's not necessarily that he's picked up this amazing grappling game and, hey, you better watch out, Jacare, you might get submitted. No, it's nothing like that. But it's a formidable takedown defense game where now all of a sudden you're just going back up against the ninja. You know what I mean? Because that's what Uriah Hall is. So that little tactical game, we saw a little bit of it with Shoeface and a few of the fights that Uriah Hall's just had over the years where if he's able to get past it, he's a lot of fun to watch. You root for him. He's been through a lot. And maybe I guess I developed a little bit of a soft spot for him when he was at Extreme Couture. Now he's at Fortis MMA. But I'm definitely looking forward to that one because I think that subplot's going to be very, very interesting. I think Jacare is just older now. He knows that this may be his final run. He can't afford that loss. I think Uriah Hall could take one more loss and still have a run to go, but he doesn't want to do that because right now he's actually gained some momentum. So a newfound love and spirit, within himself since moving to Fortis MMA. So I'd like to see him get that win.
I love it, man. Like kind of like the matchup that Goze picked there. I mean, tactically it's intriguing, but also, where they are in each of their careers, man, it's intriguing as well. So both those are really good picks, guys. Well, listen, it's a great lineup. UFC 249 is fantastic, as you said. I mean, the prelims alone, they'll be on ESPN and ESPN Plus. Free entertainment there for the most part. If you got cable, I know it's not totally free, but most everybody's got cable, right? If you can't afford the pay-per-view right now, which is totally understandable, man, it's tough financial times for everybody. At least you're still going to get a hell of a show. And if you can get in on the pay-per-view, it's going to get even better there. We will have full coverage at MMA Junkie. I want to give a shout out to Juan Ramirez. I saw the OG in there giving us some shout outs in the comments today as well. So this was fun, kind of being on the other side of the ball at MMA Junkie Radio. So maybe we can do this again sometime, fellas. I know we've all got busy afternoons and it's almost fight week again. So we appreciate everybody for joining us. And guys, thanks for the time. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you, man.
Awesome.